Hello, all my crafty friends. Welcome to Funday Monday number 3. Today we're going to look at the standard yarn weight system. There are 7 different types of yarn weights, and we're also going to look at the recommended hooks to use with those different yarn weights. So if you're ready, let's get started. So the first yarn weight that we're going to look at falls under the label of 0, and it is called lace. If you were going to work up a swatch of 4 inches, the suggested gauge, and remember gauge means your tension, would be about 32 to 42 single crochets. Here is an example of that lace yarn. You can see that it is very, very thin. It is almost like thread. The recommended size hooks for a lace weight yarn are your very tiny small hooks all the way up to a B 2.5. This is the smallest hook I have, and it doesn't even have a size listed on it. This is your Bates 8 hook. It's normally a 1.4 millimeter, sometimes a 1.5 millimeter, and you can see it has a very small head on it. Next we have a 2.0 millimeter, and there's the head. And then you have your B 2.25 millimeter, and there's the head on it. The second yarn weight is under the label of a 1, and it is defined as super fine yarn. And if you were doing a swatch of 4 inches, the suggested gauge would be 21 to 32 single crochets. Here is a sample of that super fine weight yarn, and you can see it has a number 1 on the label. This is normally used as sock yarn. The recommended hooks for super fine yarn is a B 2.25 to an E 3.5. Here is your B 2.25 millimeter hook again, and there's a size hook on that one. Next is your 2.25 millimeter, and there's the hook on that one. Then you have your C 2.75, and there's the hook head on that one. Then you have your 3.0 millimeter, and there's a size head hook on that one. And then D 3.25 millimeters. It should not say 0.125. That's a mistake. And then there's a size hook on that one. And then your E 3.5 millimeter, and there's the size of your hook on that one. And then if we hold them all up together, there they are. So you can see that they still require very, very small yarn. The third yarn weight that we're going to look at falls under the label of 2, and it is considered a fine yarn. If you were doing a 4-inch swatch, the suggested gauge for a fine yarn would be 16 to 20 single crochet stitches. Here is an example of that fine yarn, and as you can tell, it is still a very, very thin yarn. And you can see it has a number 2 on the label. And the recommended hooks for fine yarn is an E 3.5 to a 4.5. And again, here is your E 3.5 millimeter hook and the size of that hook. Next is your F 3.75 millimeter and the size of that hook. Next is your G 4.25 millimeter and the size of that head hook, and then your 4.5 millimeter and the size of the head of that hook. And if you put them all together, that's what they look like. So still kind of a fine yarn, but getting bigger. The fourth yarn weight that we're going to look at falls under the label of 3, and it is called a light yarn. And if you were doing a 4-inch swatch of that, the suggested gauge would be 12 to 17 single crochets. And here is a sample of that yarn. So you can tell it's gotten a lot bigger. It's got a lot more thickness to it. It's not near as fine. And the recommended hooks for the light yarn weight is 4.5 to 5.5. And again, here's your 4.5 millimeter and the size of that hook. The next one I have is the H5 millimeter and the size of that hook. An I, which is a 5.25 millimeter and the size of that hook. And then your 5.5 millimeter and the size of that hook. And that's what they look like when you put them all together. So you can definitely tell that we're getting to a bigger, fluffier yarn with a little bit of thickness to it. So the fifth yarn weight that we're going to look at is the medium weight. And if you were doing a 4-inch swatch of that, the suggested gauge would be 11 to 14 single crochets. And a sample of a 4 would be this red heart yarn. And you can see on the label there, it's got a 4. The recommended hooks for a 4 medium weight yarn is a 5.5 to a 6.5 hook. So again, we have our 5.5, and there's the size of that hook. Our 5.75 J hook, and there's the size of that hook. Our 6.0 millimeter, and the size of that one. Now, I'm going to show you something real quick. Both of these, the 5.75 and J hook, I've always known the 6 millimeter hook to be the J hook. And if you look, those heads are practically identical. So I think sometimes the different brands of hooks may have the millimeters off just a little bit, because a 6 millimeter hook is your J hook, even though this one says 5.75. And then your K hook is your 6.5 millimeter. And look at the size of that one. It's got a very big head on it. And if we line these up, you can see that they definitely work with a much bigger yarn. So the 6 yarn weight that we're going to look at is under the label of 5, and it is called a bulky yarn. And if you were doing a 4-inch swatch of that to get the suggested gauge, you would do about 8 to 11 single crochets. Here is a sample of a bulky yarn. And on the label there, you can see it has a number 5 on it, and it says bulky. And yeah, check out the thickness of that yarn. That's pretty thick. And the recommended hooks for that bulky yarn are a 6.5 to a 9 millimeter. So again, here's your K 6.5. The next one I have is your 7.0 millimeter and the size of that hook. And then your L 8 millimeter. And I do not have a M hook, which is a 9 millimeter. I do not own one of those yet. And here's a look at all three of those hooks together. And the seventh and final yarn weight that we're going to look at falls under the label of 6. It is a super bulky yarn. If you were going to do a 4-inch swatch of that, to get the suggested gauge, you would have to do about 5 to 9 single crochets. I do not currently have any of that yarn in my stash. The closest I have to a super bulky is on the rug that I made. And let me see, that right there is your strand. So you can definitely see that that is a very, very big bulky yarn. And the recommended hooks for super bulky are your M, N, and larger hooks. And I do not have an M, but I do have an N size 10. And look at the head hook on that bad boy. Well, that wraps up this video for this Funday Monday. I thank you for inviting me over and allowing me to talk with you about the 7 different yarn weights and the recommended hooks for those yarn weights. I hope that you found this video to be helpful and informative. And if you liked it, be sure and give it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel and you've not done so already, be sure and hit the subscribe button and then go over and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. And I hope to see you next Monday with our next video in our Funday Monday series. Have a great week. Be joyful. Stay crafty in your own way and make your own joyful creations. Bye.